Welcome back to week 4 of our Markidini Crochet Along. This week we're going to be working the second part of our second large square. So weeks 1 and 2 we worked this first large square, week 3 we worked this first part, and now for week 4 we're working the second part. So we'll be starting with blocks 13 and 14. They're similar blocks divided by this horizontal line. You can choose to work them in the same color so it looks like one whole block, or different colors, and that's up to you. So we'll start right in with block 13. So for the foundation row, I've attached my yarn in the back beside the vertical line that we made beside block 9 last week. So just in the bottom, attach your yarn in the back. We're going to be making 30 chains across, and then we'll come back and, working in the back bump of the chain, pick up 30 loops. So you can go ahead and work that chain 30 and then start picking up your loops on the back side of the chain till we've picked up 30 loops. There'll be 31 loops on your hook, and I'll meet you just before we connect to the vertical line for row 1. So once you've picked up your 30 loops, we should have 31 loops on our hook, and then we will just go in the back behind that first row of the vertical line to make our connection and then begin our return pass. So once you've picked up the connection loop, it's 32 loops, and then we'll just work our regular return pass for this row 1, or for that foundation row of block 13. So for row 2, we are only going to be using, actually for rows 2 up to row 12 for this block 13, we're using reverse stitch and knit stitches. So all we need to do is follow the chart, count how many reverse stitch and knit stitches we have in between each other, and work regular return passes. So I'll do row 2 with you, and then we can work all the way up to the end of row 12. So we'll start with 2 reverse stitches. So remember, those reverse stitches are the back loop. So like a TSS, only using the back loop to go through. So that's 1, 2 reverse stitches, followed by 2 knit. 1 and 2. Then we'll work 6 reverse stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 reverse stitches. 2 knit, 1 and 2, and 5 reverse stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 2 more knit stitches. 1 and 2, and 6 reversed. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. Plus one more, I didn't count that accurately, it's 7 reverse stitches. 2 knit, 1 and 2, which should leave us with 2 stitches left, so we'll work reverse stitch on each of those. 1 and 2. And then joining, connecting to that second row of a vertical line on the back. And we'll work a regular return pass. Yarning over and pulling through 2 all the way down the row. So all our return passes for blocks 13 and 14 are regular return passes. We can just yarn over and pull through 2 on each row for our return pass. So just follow that chart carefully, as each row has slightly different counts of the TRSs between the knit stitches. Most of the knit stitches are in groups of 2. Except right here in the center part here, there's 2 rows where we have 3 knit stitches in a row. The rest of the time it's 2 knit stitches, and just count carefully how many TRS in between. So always working, once you've made the connection loop, you'll always have 32 loops on your hook, and we'll follow the chart for 12 rows. So as we're working our way along block 13, just want to take a moment to check in and mention just a couple of things. So the first one is just a reminder, after we have picked up all of our loops and made our connection stitch, there should be 32 loops on our hook before we do the return pass. The other thing is block 13 is 12 rows, so you can see how I've added a stitch marker there. So if you want to count on your vertical line, you can see the return passes here. If you can't get, you can either count the V's on the edges. If you've already made some attachments, that might be a bit harder to count those V's, but you can also see the horizontal line of the return pass. And you can count up 12 there to put your stitch marker in. And that just makes sure that we have counted the right number of rows and we're ending in the proper place for this square. Then one last comment I want to make is on the chart itself. It's easy to second guess ourselves or to get into a rhythm. It is not quite symmetrical, so the number of TRS stitches in this section here is different than just past that center section. So you just want to make sure, so on this row here, row 7, there's 3 TRS before the center pattern and 4 on the other side. So there's always one more on this side of the chart, so just watch for that carefully as you're working your way through block 13. So when you're finished the 12 rows, block 13 should look similar to this. You'll want to work a bind off row across the top of row 12, ending in the same stitch or the same row where we attached row 12. Block 13 complete. You will attach your yarn in the back behind the border edge, and working behind each stitch, you will pick up 30 loops across, making the connection or attaching to the next row up on the vertical line from where we've finished off block 13. So you should have 32 loops on your hook. You'll work the regular return pass, yarn over, pull through 2 all the way along the row, and then you'll work 2 more rows of TSS and bind off for this horizontal line. So again, I've marked my 3rd row up, 1, 2, 3 for where I want to finish my horizontal line. I've marked that on the vertical line, so we'll do 3 rows of TSS plus bind off. Okay, remember that the bind off row goes in the same row as our last row of the horizontal line. So block 14 is a continuation of what we worked on block 13. So we will be working 12 rows again, so you're going to want to mark on your vertical line the 12th row up with the marker to make sure that we end in the correct spot. And we still have those with our connection loop, the 32 loops across. So our first row for block 14, you can attach your yarn behind the horizontal line and then picking up loops across. You will pick up 30 loops, and when we attach to this side, we'll give 32 loops on our hook. And we'll work the regular return pass, and then I'll help you get started with row 2 of block 14. So go ahead and work your return pass, and I'll meet you back here in a moment. So to work row 2, we're going to start with 2 reverse, 2 knit, 9 reverse, 3 knit, 10 reverse, 2 knit, and 2 reverse. So starting with 2 reverse stitches, remember that's picking up the loop from the back loop of our work. So 2 reverse, then knit twice. Then we'll work, 9 reverse, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 3 knit, 1, 2, and 3, and 10 reverse, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, 2 knit, and then there should be 2 stitches left, and they're both reverse stitches. 1 and 2 reverse, or 2 TRS. Then we'll connect to the next row up on the vertical line and work our return pass. And that's the first couple of rows of block 14. So similarly, as you're following the chart, as we did with block 13, there's 1 extra reverse stitch in between the knit stitches on this side of the chart. So just watch for that. Go ahead and complete your 12 rows plus a bind off row for block 14. So now we want to work another vertical line on the sides of blocks 13 and 14. So we will be doing 27 rows in our vertical line. We just join at the back, at the bottom corner at the back, and chain 4. And then we will pick up 4 loops on those back bumps of that chain. And then we want to connect in the back of the first row of block 13 and do the regular return pass. Okay, so just a reminder that these vertical lines are just rows of TSS, the simple stitch, picking up 4 loops, and when we make the connection, we connect behind those border loops of blocks, and then we'll have 6 loops on our hook and regular return pass. So you can go ahead and work these 27 rows of the vertical line on the sides of blocks 13 and 14. Do not bind off when you get to the top. Just a tip when we're connecting with these rows of vertical line to blocks 13 and 14, remember how we have worked mostly or all reverse stitches on these edge stitches here? So sometimes when you go to connect, it doesn't look quite the same. We don't seem to have that same back bump. So we just want to pick, there is a horizontal bump here. It just looks slightly different than when we've worked TSS on those rows. So just finding a loop behind those border stitches to attach our vertical lines. So when you've completed your vertical line, you should have 12 connections to block 13, 3 to the horizontal line, and then 12 more connections to block 14 for a total of 27 rows. Do not bind off this line, but you may fasten off. Block 15. We are going to be working sort of a diagonal pattern using knit stitches and purl stitches. So when you take your color, you will join behind the bottom row of the vertical line we just finished, chain 13, and then working in the back bumps, you'll pick up 13 loops. So when you've made your connection behind the first row of the vertical line, you should have 15 loops on your hook. So we'll just complete a regular return pass. And then we can go ahead and work a second row of straight TSS, the simple stitch. So row 2, we'll just pick up loops in the front for the simple stitch, make our connection and the regular return pass for row 2. So starting at row 3, I'll help you get started with the chart. We'll make 2 simple stitches, then 8 knit stitches and 1 purl stitch, and ending with the 2 simple stitches as well. And then as you can see, each row the number of knit stitches will decrease and the number of purl stitches will increase, and then we'll reverse that with purl stitches ending with a knit stitch. The purls will decrease, the knits will increase, and so on. So row 3, 2 simple stitches to start, 1 and 2, and followed by the 8 knit stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and then 1 purl stitch. Remember the purl stitch, we bring that yarn to the front first before we yarn over and pull up our loop, and ending with 2 simple stitches. Then connecting to the 3rd row up on the vertical line and regular return pass. So I'll let you continue to work your way through the chart for block 15. You will have a total of 27 rows, and you will make the bind off at the top of this block as well. So at the end of row 10, your block should look similar to this. And now we're going to switch where we start with purl stitches and end each row with the knit stitch. So we'll start, as always, with the 2 simple stitches, and then we're going to work 8 purl stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and ending with 1 knit stitch before we do our final 2 TSS for the row. And then we'll make our connection. And just a reminder, once you've picked up your connection loop, you'll have 15 loops on your hook for block 15. And then we'll do our regular return pass, yarn over, pull through 2, all the way down the row. So that's row 11 I just did with you. And you can go ahead and complete the rest of the rows all the way up to row 27, and I'll meet you at the end of this block. We have reached a part in the pattern where it's time to make a decision. We have finished this first big block on this far side and worked this first part of the next large block. So now that we have finished block 15, if you are going on to the large blanket, which is all 9 of these larger squares, then you will need to add this vertical line beside block 15. If, however, you are opting for either the small size, which is these 4 large blocks, which would be a baby or a lapghan size, or if you're going for the medium size, which is these 6 large blocks, then we do not add the vertical line. We will be adding a border to the outside edge. So if you were doing the whole large blanket, there's no vertical lines or horizontal lines on the far side since the border goes around there. So that's a choice you're going to have to make right now. I am going to be demonstrating the medium size blanket for you, so I am not adding my far vertical line. If you want to continue on to the large blanket, you would just attach your yarn on the back side on this lower corner, chain 4 and pick up the loops. So you would have 5 on your hook, make the connection for 6 on your hook, and then you would just follow up the 27 rows for the vertical line. Once you would get to the top, you would start the horizontal line across. So I'm going to be starting up at the top for this horizontal line, remembering I'm making the medium size blanket. But if you're going on for the large blanket, please add this vertical line first to the top of the 27 rows. Do not bind off. So for the horizontal row, if you made the vertical line here, you did not bind off, and you would just continue picking up the 4 loops from the vertical line. Then once you get to block 15, you will pick up the 13 loops across. When we get to this next vertical line, remember we skip over those border stitches and pick up the loops on the vertical line here. So 4 more loops picked up on the vertical line. There it is. So you pick up the 4 loops on the vertical line, skipping over those border stitches. And then when we reach block 14, again, we don't pick up by the border stitch, and in the back of the first stitch, we begin pulling up the loops across block 15. So this will be 30 loops that we pick up across block 14. Okay, so when you've picked up your loops, you have 13 across block 15, the 4 across the vertical line, 30 across this. So with our starting loop, that would be 48 loops. If you did the vertical line, you would have 4 more, which would be 52 loops. So then we're ready to make our connection to the vertical line at the edge of last week's block. So just starting the next row up from block 14, we'll make our connection and do the regular return pass. Okay, and once you've worked that return pass off, you can make 2 more rows of Tunisian simple stitch and bind off this horizontal line. So I finished my horizontal line with the rows of TSS, 2 more rows, and then the bind off row finishing at the vertical line in the same spot as the last TSS line. Remember, if you did the vertical line, you will have a little bit more of a stripe on this side as well, which I don't have. So we're ready for the final block for week 4. This last square for this week is based on a type of Celtic knot pattern. So we're making cables again in this square. We'll just have to watch carefully. Sometimes we have 1 over 1 cable, 2 over 1, and sometimes 2 over 2 cables. So I will try and show you each of those types of cables as we work through this. The types of stitches: simple stitch, knit stitch, and the purl stitch. So again, there are 2 pages for the chart for this one, so make sure you are looking at the page 7 chart where we have row 1 on the bottom. We're just going to pick up our loops all the way across and have regular return pass for row 1. So remember, if you did the vertical line here, you want to start after the 4th stitch of that vertical line, just behind where it would line up with the edge of block 15. Okay, so we're just going to join our yarn in the back and then begin picking up loops across the top in those back loops as we have previously. So we will pick up 47 loops across. Okay, when you've picked up your loops across, we should have picked up 47 loops. We should now have 48 on our hook. And then we'll make our connection to the first row up on the vertical line on last week's block. And then we should have the 49 loops on our hook as listed on the chart. So then, as I said, we're just going to do the regular return pass, yarn over and pull through 2 all the way down the row. So you can go ahead and complete that, and I'll join you for row 2. Start with 22 purl stitches. 2 knit stitches, and then end the row with more purl stitches. So we can go ahead and work row 2. 1, 2, 3, 21, 22, and we'll work 2 knit stitches, 1 and 2, and then finish the row with purl stitches, making the connection to the second row or the next row up on that vertical line. So I've made my connection for row 2, and we're going to work the return pass. We want to work off the stitches until this one just before the knit stitches, and we will be working a 1 over 1 cable there. So yarn over, pull through 2, I think 22 times, or until we get just before that knit stitch. So I've reached the last purl stitch before the knit stitch there. So if you are used to working your cables in the forward pass, when we worked those knit stitches, you would have picked up the first knit stitch, taking it off the hook to bring the purl across it, and same with this second set. So I'm showing you this time in the return pass. So we will take these 3 loops off the hook, the knit stitch falls to the front, put the purl back on, cross the knit, put it back on the hook, and the working yarn back on. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Then we'll do the same thing again, remove those 3 stitches, the purl stitch goes to the back, knit stitch back on the hook, purl stitch back on, and the working yarn, yarn over, pull through 2, and pull through 2 for our first set of those 1/1 cables. And then we'll just finish that return pass all the way down the rest of this row. So row 3, we will work our purl stitches, then we'll make 4 knit stitches over top of the cables and end the row with purl stitches, regular return pass. So you can go ahead and work that row, and I'll meet you back here to help with row 4 where we have some more cables. So on row 3, when you get to the cable, we're going to work those 4 knit stitches over top. You want to be careful that you only work through the stitch you need. So through the knit stitch, this purl is crossed behind, so we don't want to grab that one in the knit stitch. Then this next purl stitch is a bit hidden. We work a knit stitch in there, and then in that last stitch. So we have 4 knit stitches in a row over top of the cables. Okay, so we finished row 3. We can start to see a very little bit of that Celtic knot pattern starting to show. We're going to work row 4 now, so we'll work a series of purl stitches and right until where we get to our knit stitches, and we'll work 4 more knit stitches and more purl. If you're working the forward pass cable, we will pull off the 2 purls and the 2 knits to cross those. So we're crossing 2 over 2 this time. So the first cable I will show in the forward pass, the second cable I'll show on the return pass. Okay, so for row 4 I have picked up, or I've done my 20 purl stitches. So there's 2 more purl stitches to do before the 2 knit stitches. So this cable I'm going to show in the forward pass. If you're doing return pass cables, just pick up these loops and ignore the cable part for right now. So 2 purls and 2 knit stitches. Then we want to take those 4 loops off the hook, the 2 purl fall to the back, and I'm going to use my cable holder, put the knit stitches back on, cross those purls over and back on the hook. And that's our first cable. Then we're ready for the second cable, so we'll work 2 knit stitches and 2 purl. So if you're doing the forward pass cable, you will take those 4 loops off and complete that second cable. For the return pass cable, I'll show you when we come back to this on our return pass. So we're just going to work down the rest of the row right now, making purl stitches. So you can go ahead and do that, make the connection, and start the return pass until just before these cables. So I'll meet you back at the cables on the return pass. Okay, so return pass for row 4, I have taken off the loops and I've stopped with these last 2 purls before the 2 knit stitches. So when we work the cable on the return pass, we need to take our working yarn loop off as well. So we remove those 5 loops. You can see how the knit stitches are falling to the front. So that's where we will let them lay. and then put the purl stitches back on our hook, cross the knit stitches, and the working yarn back on our hook. Oops. Okay, now because we've worked 2 over 2 cables, it's helpful to put that extra yarn over, or that chain 1, in between the 2 crossed stitches. So we will yarn over, pull through 2 twice, then the yarn over, pull through 1, or chain 1, then yarn over, pull through 2 twice again. So that's the first cable that we've removed. If you didn't work this next cable in the forward pass, you'll need to take the 5 loops off and work your cable now. And then as well, we need to remember to add that extra chain 1. So we pull through the first 2 of the second cable, chain 1, and then we'll pull through the next 2 of this cable. There we go. And then we can just work the return pass for the rest of the row to complete row 4. Okay, so hopefully that gets you started on this block and that you're able to work your way now. So row 5 comes next. There's no cable worked in row 5. And then row 6 has cables again. So you just need to keep following the chart to see where your cables are. And sometimes there's cables, sometimes there's no cables. When we get up into this middle section here, there are more frequent cables. So I'm going to let you try your hand at working through the next 10 rows or so, and I'll try and meet you back here. So I've finished to the end of row 9, and hopefully that has gone all right for you. Remember, in row 9 we need to have these 2 knit stitches in the middle of those cable to start our next part of the Celtic knot part of these cables. So if you've been having any difficulties, a couple of things to keep in mind is count every row, especially these purl stitches before and after the cables, that we have those numbers correctly. And if those are off, you might have missed a stitch in between, or remember, when we work the cable, sometimes those purl stitches are hidden a little bit on either side, to be watching for those. So let's start working row 10 together. Row 10, as you can see, we will be starting with 3 cables. So we'll be working our 15 purl stitches to start, and the 2 knit stitches, and working that cable there. So 15 purl stitches to start row 10. One, 2, 3, 4, 14, and 15 purl stitches to start row 10. Then we'll knit into 1 and 2. And if you're working the forward pass cable, we'll take those 4 stitches off, the purl stitches fall to the back, put the knit stitches back on, and put the purl stitches back on for the first cable. Then we'll make 5 purl stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that last purl stitch, the 5th one, is the first of our 1 over 1 cable. So we'll knit in the next stitch, which should be the first of the knit stitches that we did in the middle there last round or row. Take those 2 stitches off, put the knit stitch back on, and cross the purl stitch behind for our first cable. Okay, so we're ready for the next small cable. We'll knit in the next stitch, purl in the next. Take those 2 off, the knit stitch falls to the front, put the purl stitch on, and cross that knit stitch back onto the hook. So we've already used this stitch for our purl stitch. So in the next 4 stitches, we will purl as well. So 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that should be the last purl stitch before these 2 knit stitches. So we will work knit stitch in each of those, and then purl the next 2, and then we'll work our final cable for this row. Knit stitches to the front, put the purl back on, cross those knit stitches for our last cable. And we've already used this stitch here for our purl, so starting at that next one, we should purl in the next 16 stitches. That's 2, 3, that's 13, and 14 purl stitches. So we already had done 2 purl stitches in our cable, so that just left 14 left to do, not 16 as I said earlier. So 14 purl stitches, ready to make our connection on the next row up, and then our return pass. So I've worked all of my cables on the forward pass, so it's a regular return pass, except for where we have this first cable and that last cable. We want to add that chain 1 in the middle of those cables. So I'll take off my 14, 2, 3, 4, 13, and 14, and then I've reached that first cable, so I'll take off those first 2 stitches, add my chain 1, then the next 2 stitches to finish that first cable, and then we'll take off the next 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I've reached my second cable. So if you're working your cable in the return pass, you will take off those 2 stitches and do the cable, and we don't need to chain 1 here. And then we've reached our third cable. So again, if you're working return pass, take off those 2 stitches to work the cable, and then regular return pass through those 2, and then 4 purl stitches, 3 and 4, and we should have reached our last cable. So again, you can take them off your hook and work the cable if you're doing it in the return pass. We'll do the return pass through the first 2, add a chain 1, and 2 more to finish that cable, and then we'll just take all the stitches off for regular return pass. There, and that is row 10. So I'll have you do the next couple of rows. Just be careful. On row 12, we have 6 cables all touching each other back to back. So just count that out carefully as you're working your forward and return passes there. Just checking in after row 12 here to make sure that you got these series of 6 cables in a row there. One thing you may want to do as we're working through is put a marker in. I put mine at the 10th row up the side. Remember, you can count the rows by these V's on the edge. So you might want to start adding stitch marks every 10 or 15 rows so you remember where you are. And similarly on that vertical line over here, I've connected the 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. I'm just going to put a marker in that 20th to make sure that I've lined up my rows with the vertical line accurately as we continue to work that. So that was row 12 with these connected cables back to back. Hopefully that worked all right for you. You can go ahead and work the next few rounds. I will work round row 16 with you to help with those back-to-back cables in that section. So hopefully you can start seeing how this Celtic knot is starting to take some shape. We're ready to work row 16 together. So we're going to start with the 9 purl stitches and 2 knit. And sometimes I find this first purl stitch sometimes gets a bit hidden, so be careful to work that very first purl stitch as well. So that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 purl stitches. Then we'll work 2 knit stitches, and then using those 4 loops we'll make our forward pass cable. So I will show some of these cables in the forward pass and some on the return pass this row. So we take the 4 loops off, the purl stitches fall to the back, put the knit stitches back, back on, and the purl stitches back on. So if you're feeling comfortable, you can see how I've started to use my fingers even for the 2/2 cable. If it's still a bit tricky for you, please use that cable holder so you don't lose your stitches in between. Then we'll work the next 2 knit stitches and 2 purl for another cable. So the cables are all back to back on this row. So we'll take those 4 stitches off, the knit fall to the front, put the purl back on, and put the knit stitches back on the hook. Two more purl, 1 and 2 and 2 knit, 1 and 2. Take those 4 loops off, the purl stitches fall to the back, put the knit back on, and those purl stitches back on. Now you have to be careful sometimes when you use your fingers, those loops can cross over each other, so you want to make sure that they lay in their proper order when you put them back on. 2 knit stitches and 2 purl stitches. And take those 4 off, 2 knit to the front, the purl back on, and the knit stitches back on. Okay, and that is 4 cables we've done in the forward pass. I'm going to switch now. These next 4 cables, I'll pick up the loops, but I'll show you how to make how to do the cable again on the return pass. So it's 2 purls and 2 knit. Okay, and if you're going to continue with the forward pass, you'll work those 4 loops for a cable. 2 knit and 2 purl. And that would be your next cable. 2 purl and 2 knit, and those 4 loops form another cable, and then last one is 2 knit, 2 purl, and that would form 1 more cable. So there's a total of 8 cables on this row that we're working, and then we'll finish the row with 8 purl stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 purl stitches, and make our next connection the next row up. Okay, then we'll do the 8 purl that we take off in the return pass. That's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then those next 4 loops are the start of our cable stitches. So these are the return pass cables we're going to work. So we take the 5 loops off, the 2 knit fall to the front, put the purl back on, and put the knit back on, and our working yarn. And then work that return pass. So we take those 2 stitches off, chain 1, take the next 2 purls off. Then we've reached the next cable, remove 5 loops, and cross them and put them back on the hook. Return pass, take off 2 loops, chain 1, take off 2 more. And the next cable, take off those first 2 loops, chain 1, the next 2 loops, and then we're at the 4th cable. Two loops we'll take off. There's 1, 2, chain 1, and 2 more loops. 1 and 2. Okay, then we have 4 more cables. If you're continuing to do the return pass cables, you'll need to remember to work these ones as well. I worked these 4 in the forward pass, so it's just a regular return pass, remembering that chain 1 after the first 2 stitches in each cable. 2 and the chain 1, then the last 2 of that cable. Ready for the next cable, take 2 off, chain 1, take 2 more off, take 2 off, chain 1, take 2 off, and this should be the last cable. Take those first 2 stitches off, chain 1, and then the last 2 stitches of the cable. And then you can take the remaining stitches off for the regular return pass then. So 8 cables in 1 row. Hope that went well for you. If you find your tension is loose when you're doing the cables and that chain 1 makes it look sloppy, you can try going without the chain 1, or every other cable may be without the chain 1. But most of us need that extra chain 1 just to allow a bit more room for those stitches to cross each other. So that was row 16. So 17, we will just be making some knit and purl stitches with a regular return pass. Row 18 doesn't have as many cables, but just watch. This is the first time we have the 3/2 cable on either side there. Worked the same way, just with the 3 stitches instead of 2. So I'll check in with you at the end of row 21, our halfway point for this block. So you go ahead and work up to row 21, and I'll see you there. So we have reached the halfway point. Round 21 is complete. Hopefully that went all right with you. There was a lot of cables in row 20, but the hardest part is over. Now we get to decrease and get smaller number of cables each row. So you're going to turn to the second page of the chart now. Starting at the bottom row here, which is row 22, we're going to work our way through the chart all the way through to round 42. So I'll let you go ahead and work that, and you should be meeting at the top row of the vertical line when we're done row 42. If you haven't taken a break, it's a good idea to do that. It goes a lot easier with a fresh mind. So enjoy this last half, and I'll see you at the end of block 16. At the end of block 16, you will want to make your bind off row across the top, and then we will work on our horizontal line. Now, just a reminder, if you're continuing on to the large size blanket, you will need to come down where we started block 16. You will attach your yarn at the top of your vertical line, pick up those 4 loops and attach to each of these rows on block 16 to make your vertical line. You will not bind off the vertical line. You'll pick up the 4 loops, and then starting on block 16, you would pick up the 47 loops across and connect to the third last row of the vertical line over here and start working this horizontal line. So if you're using the small or the medium blanket, you'll attach on the back at the edge of block 16, pick up the 47 loops and work the return pass. So once you've picked up your loops, you will have 49 loops on your hook once you've made that first connection, or 53 loops on your hook if you're working the vertical line as well. And then you will do 2 more rows of the TSS and a bind off row, and that completes week 4. I look forward to seeing you back for week 5.